All right. Our scripture reading today comes from the words of Jesus. These words are not just from the gospel, but from Jesus himself, and especially regarding the topic of homosexuality. Jesus opined on all sorts of topics he had issues with: hungry children, poor people, systems of economic exploitation, war, violence, just to name a few. He also spoke about love, unity, togetherness, sharing, compassion. But what did Jesus have to say about homosexuality? Here are Jesus' words on this topic on this Pride Sunday. This ends our scripture reading for today.
It really could have been the sermon. Oh my. Ask me what Jesus said about homosexuality. It said on his sign as he held it high over his head. Ask me what Jesus said about homosexuality. This is a story from right before I moved down here 10 years ago to be with y'all here at Faith. I was recounting it for some reason the other night to one of the two Thursday groups. I can't remember which one, but I thought I'd tell it to you again as part of the sermon because they got quite a chuckle out of it. You see, I was at the big, giant Minneapolis Pride Parade, one of the largest in the nation. It was held in this place called Loring Park, right in downtown Minneapolis, and it had like this festival-like atmosphere where over, I think, close to 500,000 people would celebrate over an entire weekend. It was like Woodstock. It was just crazy fun. It always kicked off Friday afternoon into the evening with a massive party. What a thing to experience. A parade was held on Sunday, but Saturday was known as Festival Day. We're all around this giant park, and this is a really, really big park. There were tents set up all along the walking trail, cool things to buy and services for LGBT community folks and allies like me that were there to celebrate inclusion and love and pride, and so people just walk around. It was a whole day thing. And so on this is my last Minneapolis Pride for me. I was working a booth with some church folks. We were the faith component to this. We had our tent set up along the walking hill, and behind us, just a little tiny bit off in the distance, not far, right behind us, there was this fenced-in area, and it was literally, I think it was like a large shuffleboard court or something. It had a beautiful big wrought iron fence around it. It turns out that was the perfect place to put the loud and vocal protesters that showed up in force and venom. They were also present. They had their own little area. They were penned in, fenced in, and they were not allowed to leave it to enter the festival. That was the way of separating things. It worked out beautifully each and every year. Most years I would just see the protesters. I'd see them around, their big signs, and they would leave leaflets on my car. You know the ones, right? It's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I think it was the first place I ever saw that one. Others about repenting and about the devil and hell and condemnation. But this year the protesters were right behind me. And I was doing a whole day shift at the booth, so I got to listen to their fomenting blather all day long as they just vomited out this evil stuff. And so you know me, I can't resist. I can't resist a penned-in agitator. So from time to time, I would leave my booth when other people were working, and I'd go up the slope to the pen of the Walking Dead, and I would engage them, and I would just have a blast doing this. And there were police all over the place, let me say. So I felt pretty safe to go and do this. Some in the pen were shouting with bullhorns, and they're quoting scripture through a bullhorn, or they're just blurting out condemnation and anger and rage. Others just stood there and held signs. Like my guy was holding a sign, and his sign said, "Ask me what Jesus said about homosexuality." I'd focused on that sign a couple times, and he was my targeted protester. So I went up to this fella. I did just that. I said, "Hey, man, your sign says to ask you what Jesus said about homosexuality." So I asked him that. Now I'm getting ready. I'm like, I can't wait to see what I have missed in all my studies of the Gospels. I'm thinking maybe this guy is a biblical prodigy, and he found things that I didn't even know were there. Maybe he has the secret source that I know exists. We just haven't found it yet. It's the official biography of one Jesus H. Christ. Maybe he's got that. It's finally coming to light. I'm excited. Who knows what this guy has, but he's pretty confident that Jesus said something, right? I'm on pins and needles. So I ask him, tell me what Jesus said about homosexuality, about being gay, LGBT. The suspense is killing me. And so then he quoted Paul. I said, no, finger wave. I said, what Jesus said, not Paul. Tell me what Jesus said. Please, for the love of God, tell me like your sign says what Jesus said. And he quoted Leviticus. At this point, I'm starting to think my dream of the official biography of one Jesus H. Christ is just not coming out that day. But I asked him one more time, though, thinking that maybe he just forgot it's going to become clear. So I asked again, what did Jesus say, like it says on your sign, about homosexuality? And he blurted out, Sodom and Gomorrah, buddy, it's all there. Sodom and Gomorrah, it's all in there. From that point on, I was all in. I just went all in like a frenzy. And we argued like crazy. We go back and forth, me obviously schooling him, right? In the biblical text, the small number of misinterpreted, out of context, completely misunderstood scriptures from 3,600 to 2,000 years ago. He was trying to pound into a round hole like a square peg. And before I knew it, I had like the entire shuffleboard court in front of me, screaming at me, pointing at me, telling me I'm going to hell and all this stuff. The Walking Dead literally came at me. Again, thank God for the police, or I might not be standing here before you today. That's how angry it was out there. It was just hot out there, the tension. And after several more trips up and down that slope that June afternoon, I was denied each time, and I was never able to find out what Jesus said about homosexuality. And of course, I know perfectly why. Because Jesus never said a damn word about homosexuality or being gay or marriage equality or anything else having to do with two people in love. Not a damn word. So where does their biblically based hatred come from? It hasn't changed much in the last 10 years, and actually, it may be even worse today, right? Yeah. Especially from twisted elements of Christianity, our own religion. I mean, what leads, I'm going to call this guy, he's just a crackpot pastor in Texas, to say LGBT folks, I don't know if you saw this, it's on video, should be lined up against a wall and shot in the head in the name of God. He said it last week at a church service, and his community amened it several times. Lined up against a wall because they're breaking God's law, and shot in the head. He used that language, shot in the head. This guy's a whack job. Someone please lock this lunatic up before someone gets hurt. And how about our governor? You know, what's leading our governor who went to high school right across the street there, you can see through the window, who signed that damaging "Don't Say Gay." And what do we say? Gay. What do we say? Gay. What do we say? Gay. Yes, he signed that bill into law. And now is threatening parents. This is the newest one. He's threatening parents who take their kids to Hamburger Mary's for some drag queen bingo and a burger. Have you heard about this? No. Many of you have not. I'm really surprised. Oh, it's real. Some of you can test it, right? Listen to what a Florida State representative recently said. based on the cues he's getting from the top. Quote, I will be proposing legislation to charge with a felony and terminate the parental rights of any adult who brings a child to these perverted sex shows aimed at Florida kids. When will the sexualization of children stop? End quote. Wow. This guy's got to get a life. I mean, seriously, is this really a problem? Is this really a problem, or is this more phony, biblical, right-wing outrage at the gay community? It's as scapegoats for political talking points. Political talking points that will lead to violence. How many years has it been since Pulse? That's today. 7 years since Pulse. And they're still at it. There's a similar threat in Texas to charge parents with felonies that take their kids to a Hamburger Mary's for a burger and some bingo. This time, well-known drag queen Alyssa Edwards tweeted an answer to all of these people for these ridiculous laws. She said, quote, my thoughts. 1, our God is a God of love. 2, parents are a child's first and most important teacher and role model. 3, drag is an art form which is subjective. 4, you, sir, have tweeted more about drag than the loss of children in Uvalde. Is this truly about children or politics? Hashtag priorities. Great response. Hard to disagree with that, right? But again, where does it all come from? Where does all this hatred come from? Something so beautiful and loving. Where does it come from? It's not from Jesus. But ask most anti-gay Christians to name the story that proves their anti-LGBT point, and more often than not, it's exactly what that sign holder told me. It's Sodom and Gomorrah. That's where it comes from. That's where it stems from. A myth, a story told at basically the dawn of civilization informs people's mindsets and spurs hatred into their hearts this day. And I've seen it because I've been confronted with it as an LGBT ally many times with that very text, Sodom and Gomorrah. I've been harassed at pride parades and other places with it. I've had letters sent to me that tell me that as an ally of my LGBT sisters and brothers that I'm going to burn like they did in Sodom and Gomorrah. To which I usually respond if I have an address that I, like Ron Reagan, am not afraid of burning in hell. And some of you have seen the commercial. It's for atheism, but you got it. I mean, it's 2022, right? And we still have things on the books called Sodomy Laws on our books in many states, Florida included. And thank God they are not enforceable for now, but like Roe v. Wade, I'm sure that time is coming when an anti-gay group will get their day with the Supreme Court in Lawrence v. Texas that made enforcing those laws unconstitutional, could be overturned again. But the laws are still there. And one newspaper writer put it, quote, in what are the states that still have those laws on the books? Why would they keep them when they are unenforceable? They keep them as a reminder to the LGBTQ community there are still people who do not believe that love is love, that there are still people who carry hate within their hearts. They keep those laws to intimidate the LGBTQ community. Those laws are to the homophobic what the Confederate statues and monuments are to the racists. It is long past time for them all to come down, end quote. Completely agree. But the rage against our sisters and brothers, it all begins for most from an old story about a fictitious place and a fictitious people that has been turned into fuel to fire the viciousness of hatred and violence to this very day. It's just, it's mind-boggling. So I want to explore this story with you in just a bit. Just a bit of the story. I did so years ago as part of a famous biblical couples series, but we need to delve into it again because it's surely coming to life in new ways this very day and age right here in our state and so many others. It's an awful story, right? But more than that, it's probably the most poorly interpreted story that there ever has been. I mean, what does it mean, people ask? I find it helpful not to ask that question what it means and kind of work backwards into its context instead and ask, what does it not mean? Let's explore it. And I was going to read it to you, but I'm choosing not to. So I think we've heard it enough, right? So I want to give you the Cliff Notes version. And is that, who's calling? Is that Ronnie D already calling me?
It's DeSantis.
That's what I think. I'm not happy with what I just said. So once upon a time, there's these two angels that come to a city named Sodom. They begin to pass through the gates, and lo and behold, Abraham's nephew, Lot, is sitting there in the gateway, and he sees them, and he invites them to come and stay with me, he says. And they relent, and they head to Lot's home, and all of a sudden we're told there's a mob of men at Lot's door. The author of this text from Genesis wants us to understand the gravity of the situation, for it's not just some men at Lot's door, but every inhabitant of Sodom. I mean, like everybody from Dunedin comes to this house. Think about that. Are we in the realm of myth? Gee. And we're not only that, both young and old, all of the people to the last man, the text says. Someone's trying to make a point. So all the men and all the people surround this house, and they demand Lot send out these two men so that they may know them. Now, the Hebrew word for know pops up almost 950 times in the Old Testament. We should note that only in 10 of these instances, 1% of the occurrences, does the word have anything to do with the carnal or sexual nature. The other 940 or so times, it means something else entirely different. So even this is vague. No could mean many different things. It was likely sexual in this case, to be honest, but exactly to what? That remains open to interpretation. And that's where people use it to hurt. Anyway, so now we have Lot outside of his door, right? And all these people are coming at him. He's desperately trying to protect these two men inside. At this point, he does himself no favor in earning Father of the Year accolades as we hear him say, so you know the story, hey fellas, I've got these two daughters in here who've never known a man. Why don't you take them? I mean, can you believe it? Okay, full stop. If there's perversion and sickness in this story, it's no doubt right there, right? Well, how often does anyone reference Sodom and Gomorrah? Rarely. Shouldn't there be more legislation protecting women and girls from rape and sexual violence? Because that is actually in the story. I digress. So Lot offers up his daughters. As a man with two daughters, this sickens me deeply, really. And now the men, or as it says at one point, all the people, should say the Sodomites as they're called, reject Lot's offer of his daughters, and they start pushing their way into this house. But the two angels, they grab Lot and they pull him in, striking the whole crowd blind. After some interesting haggling over where to send Lot and his family, Lot and his wife and daughters, who could not have been happy with their father at this point, understatement, well, they're sent off by the angels in order not to look back. Go over the hill, don't look back. His wife, however, could not contain her curiosity, and she looks back and she's turned into a pillar of salt. So the story goes. In the end, Abraham, who in the previous chapter had argued with God about not destroying the city, should the angels find anyone that's righteous or good people there? Well, he had his answer apparently, and he looks over the plain and sees the smoke of the land going up over the hillsides. That's the story in a nutshell. I don't have to waste your time reading it, but that's the story so many people foundationally use to condemn wonderful, awesome, loving people. That's just sick. Yeah. It's a myth. We not own up to that? Going back to that question then, asked earlier about what does a story not mean? Well, we can most certainly rule out that it's some kind of universal declaration against homosexuality, as so many unfortunately believe it is. And how can we be sure? How can we be sure? Well, this is so easy. It's such an easy question to answer. First, the Bible makes very few references to what we call today in any way homosexuality. You're just not going to find it. Is it part of the Ten Commandments? No. Or anywhere in the summary of the law? No. No and no. And no. Is it part of any prophetic discourse? No. Not even close. That'd be a negative. Does Jesus ever make one single reference to anything close to resembling homosexuality in the Gospels, like my friend in Minneapolis believed? No. That's a gigantic negative. The Gospels are silent. That's a fact. I know facts are tricky things in this day and age, but that is a fact. You can take that to the bank. One has to even search the early church, including the letters from Paul and a few others. And these are letters, might I add. They're letters, they're like emails. When you think of Paul, think of him sending an email. It's not from God, it's from Paul. You'll find only a small handful of references to anything we might associate today with homosexuality. Even these are grouped with all sorts of other references to perceived no-nos of the context to separate what the Jewish folks did from the pagan folks in their own culture. They were not universal declarations, but specific culturally focused ways of being different. That's so important. Romans 1:26-7, that the crackpot Texas murderous pastor lifted up. 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 1 Timothy 1-10, which are often also used, as well as a sprinkling of text from Leviticus. They're super open to interpretation, and they're very context-specific. Again, not universal declarations. As the great Peter Gomes, theologian, wrote in his excellent book called The Good Book, one has to look rather hard and with a user-friendly concordance to find any mention of homosexuality at all in the Bible. Second, and this stems from the first, the story has nothing to do with homosexuality as we know it because there was no such thing. There was no such thing. Gomes, in that great book again, he reminds us, quote, "The word homosexuality itself is an invention of the late 19th century and does not occur in any of the original manuscripts from which the English Bible is descended. The word did not appear in the Bible until 1946 when the Revised Standard Version came out. You may or may not see that word in the translation today, depending on the translation and the agenda of the translation. But what is certain is that you would never have found that word in any Bible in any language before 1946. End quote. I'm sure there were loving same-sex couples in these contexts, but those relationships are not what's being discussed in the Bible. It's just a fact. And third, most important for us today, is the number of references to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah that directly contradict the idea of the destruction of the cities because the people were practicing this thing called homosexuality that technically, as far as the sanctity of same-sex couples, we know today did not exist. Remember, and this is so important, the text tells us the angels were sent by God to see if there were any righteous people inhabiting the cities, and if not, they were to destroy them. Whatever happened at Lot's door had no bearing on the evil that made God want to destroy the cities in the first place. The evil had already been done. That's why the angels are going there. They were already there to do their dastardly work. And why then were they destroyed, those cities? In the story, cities that likely never even existed? Well, where do we begin? How about with Isaiah? Isaiah, as he implores the people to stop acting with the wickedness of those of Sodom and Gomorrah. Wickedness. Ceasing to do evil. That's wickedness to him. Learning instead to do good, seeking justice, rescuing the oppressed, defending the orphan, and pleading for the widow, the most vulnerable. That's wickedness to Isaiah. That's why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. How about Jeremiah, who lists up the names of Sodom and Gomorrah in relation to committing adultery and walking in lies and strengthening the hands of the evildoers and not turning from wickedness? Does that pastor in Texas want to line up all of his church members that had extramarital affairs and shoot them in the head too? It's in the Bible. Jeremiah says that's why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Both of them. I doubt he'll do that. Or how about Ezekiel? This is the most important verse. If you remember anything from this sermon, remember this. Ezekiel says straight out. How people miss this, I have no idea, but that's because they're just proof texting and using the Bible as a weapon. Ezekiel says, "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess food, and prosperous ease, but they did not aid the poor and needy." Did you hear that? Let me read that again to you. This is from Ezekiel. "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess food, and prosperous ease, but they did not aid the poor and the needy. By extension, that's why they were destroyed." Even Jesus, who sends out disciples, conjures up the inhospitality of Sodom, saying that if anyone refuses to welcome them, the punishment will be like what it was for Sodom and Gomorrah. Refuse to welcome them. Inhospitality. That's what Jesus says about Sodom and Gomorrah. His implication is clear. They were destroyed for their lack of caring and compassion and hospitality. Now, there are others, but I think you get the point by now, right? Even for the literalists, it's very, very hard to make an anti-LGBT case out of the Bible. But you can make a very, very strong case that we are called to love one another, to practice compassion, inclusion, hospitality, and to come together as one. That case you can make from the Bible. On this Pride weekend, where we celebrate the beginning of Dunedin Pride and we celebrate Pride Month, I find it important that we tackle these stories from our scriptures. We are a church, after all, that some see literally as the Word of God, and that are still being wielded like swords and weaponry. From churches and pastors that fuel the fires of exclusion, right to the high offices and the political leaders that fan the flames and spread those fires wide and far. They start in places like this, and then they just explode. So only by truly understanding stories like this in its context can we begin to counter and challenge those flames and smother the fires of discrimination with water cannons of inclusive love. To all of my LGBT sisters and brothers, I, as an ally, pledge to keep up this fight alongside of you, and pledge that this church will always keep up the struggle until true equality is achieved, and we will not let current right-wing political movements take us back, or religious movements. We won't let them take us back. It's been, 53 years since Stonewall? 53 years. And when it sprang up a movement that was fighting for equality, and the movement has taken some steps forward, many, but it's also taken some steps backwards. It has seen marriage equality, and it has seen the guarantee of civil rights, but it's also seen things like Pulse that happened 7 years ago on this very day. But there are still powerful theological and political forces at work trying desperately to undermine all of those gains. Take us back 50, 60 years. Put us back before Stonewall. But on this day that we celebrate Pride, on this Pride Month, we will declare boldly that we will not let them, no matter how powerful they think they are. We have truth on our side, right? We have truth on our side. We have love on our side. Oh yeah, we have human rights on our side. We have sound biblical interpretation on our side, not blind literalism. And with those things on our side, well then surely we have the fullness of the Jesus way, and a God that he felt he was intimately connected with, that called him into the pain of the world to turn it right side up and shake it free from oppression. We have him on our side. And looking into the future, my money's on this side any day. And no one should be surprised when love, inclusion, equality stand triumphant at the end, as they did yesterday in Dunedin with Pride. It will win. The arc of the moral universe is long, right? But it always, always bends towards justice. And we're just going to keep pulling it down a little bit more each and every day. Happy Pride. Happy Pride. We say gay. Happy Pride, we say gay. Gay. Say it with me. Happy Pride, we say gay. Happy Pride, we say gay. Happy Pride, and go Bolts. Amen. Amen. And a woman.